ओम नमो गुरु ब्रह्मादिभ्यो नमो विद्यासंप्रदायकर्तृभ्यो ओम ऋषिभ्यो नमो महद्भ्यो नमो गुरुभ्यः Namaste. A very good morning to everybody. During yesterday's session, we examined the function of Shruti as a pramana. We delved into the nature of Shruti. We highlighted that its primary objective lies not in the positive communication of Brahman, but in the negation of ignorance about Brahman. We said that the Upanishads do not offer revelatory insight into an unknown entity, but instead removes misconceptions uh, about Brahman that is readily available but subject to misconstrual. In the discourse so far, up to this point, the commentators of the Advaita tradition are in absolute agreement. Every commentator, every Vyakyanakara accepts the negative function of Shruti, accepts that Shruti works only to remove ignorance. But how to remove ignorance? This is where their viewpoints begin to diverge, and we see a difference in Shankara and the later Advaita Prakriya. So today we will try to understand both standpoints, Swamis and the Vyakyanakaras, to understand how each argues for the negative function of Shruti. The Swami writes, I'll read out an excerpt from अथेदानीं कानु स्यात् असौ वेदान्तप्रक्रिया आचार्याभीष्टा सम्प्रदायगतत्वेनेति विषये इदं वाक्यं समुपतिष्ठते तथा हि सम्प्रदायविदां वचनम् अध्यारोपापवादाभ्यां निष्प्रपञ्चं प्रपञ्च्यते. According to Shankaracharya, in order to conform to this uniquely negative task, the Shruti employs invariably, unfailingly, the method of adhyaropapavada. Adhyaropapavada is a strategy that consists of two complementary operations, adhyaropa and apavada. The word adhyaropa is often used in the Prasthanatraya texts as a synonym for adhyasa. Adhyasa is simply atasmin tad buddhihi, to erroneously confuse one object with another. This is adhyasa, adhyaropa. However, the word adhyaropa of the compound adhyaropapavada is different. In this context, it is to intentionally and temporarily ascribe false attributes to the attributeless Atman or Brahman. So there are two types of adhyaropas. One is inherent, natural, naisargika. This is the adhyasa. Synonym for adhyaropa is adhyasa. Synonym for naisargika avidyakrita adhyaropa is adhyasa. The other is intentional. It is deliberate. It is shastrakrita. So Swami says, यथोक्तरीत्या आत्मनि अनात्माध्यारोपो द्विविधो भवति नैसर्गिकाविद्याकृतः शास्त्रकृतश्चेति. तत्र अविद्याकृतो लौकिकव्यवहारो मिथ्याभूतोऽपि सत्यत्वाभिनिवेशपूर्वक इति संसारानर्थहेतुः. The first, the naisargika avidyakrita adhyaropa, is samsaranartha hetuhu. It is the cause of suffering. Whereas the shastrakritastu upadeshartham anudyamanaha samvyavaharamatralambano jijnasujana buddhi. The word is not very clear here. Bhavatiti vivekaha, that there's a misprint there, completely erased in my text. But generally, the Shastrakrita adhyaropa leads to knowledge, whereas the other, the Naisargika avidyakrita adhyaropa, leads to samsara. So it is the second type of adhyaropa that we discuss in the method of adhyaropa apavada, not the first. These are deliberately false. And these deliberately false attributes serve to counter certain undeliberated, the natural erroneous ideas about Brahman. It counters the Naisargika Adhyaropa. In other words, the Shastrakata Adhyaropa is based on the Naisargika Adhyaropa and serves to counter it. Apavada, the second step of the method, is to retract this deliberated attribution, to negate them, because it is Shastrakrita, it is deliberately the superimposed by Shastra. And Apavada is to negate it, to whatever is deliberately attributed, now you retract it, now you negate it, to refute it, so to avoid its ultimate reification, to prevent its concretization. Adhyaropa and Apavada together they form a pair. They form a single pair, each is incomplete without the other. They complement each other, they work together to form a singular pedagogical method to eliminate erroneous conceptualizations about Brahman. Note that there is a double negation that occurs here. The initial superimposition, the Shastrakritadhyaropa, negates the previously believed attributes of the self. It negates the Naisargika Adhyaropa. This is the first negation, negation A. The Apavada negates the Shastrakata Adhyaropa also. This is the second negation, negation B. So there is a double negation that occurs with the Adhyaropa method. Swami writes, Adhyaropa Prakriyāyaha hi Jeevitamidam yan mithya vikalpānape brahmanyadhyaropya तत्राध्यारोपिताद् अन्यस्य प्रतिद्वन्द्विनः प्रतिषेधः ततः तस्याप्यध्यारोपितस्य अपवाद इति. I'm reading out the English translation as well. The essence of this method is that imaginary characteristics are first deliberately attributed to the absolute. This serves to negate whatever is incompatible with those characteristics. The pratidvandvinaha is what gets negated by the Shastrakritadhyaropa. Later, the final metaphysical truth is inculcated by negating even the falsely attributed characteristics through a comprehensive denial of all particular superimpositions on the absolute. So every sentence is an adhyaropa or an apavada. It negates either a natural attribution or a deliberated one. The precise function, therefore, of the Shastrakritadhyaropa is to negate the Naisargikadhyaropa. It is apavada pradhana, that is, the focus lies in what is negated, not what is stated. What it says is not as relevant as what it is negating by saying what it is saying. अध्यारोप अध्यारोप्योपदेशः सर्वत्रापि तद् अन्य प्रतिषेधार्थः. This is important. The purpose of the Shastrakata Adhyaropa is not to simply furnish some temporary description or explanation of the empirical realm. Swami writes, it is sometimes supposed that the Vedantic avidya and other such concepts is a mere doctrine formulated to explain the appearance of difference and manifoldness. That this is a hasty judgment can be readily seen by any critical inquirer. It is not a theory brought forward just to account for appearances. Because it is not fruitful to simply furnish a temporary account of the transactional realm. We don't need the Shastra to do this. A deliberated adhyaropa is useful only so far as it refutes the natural erroneous ideas about Brahman. If it is taken as an empirical judgment, temporary or otherwise, the instructional dimension of the adhyaropa, that is the implicit negation, is lost. So, therefore, within the framework, the adhyaropa works as an active force to remove the ignorance by refuting the fallacious or fallacious conceptions of the self. Now, central to the method of adhyaropapavada is what Swami calls the two standpoint approach, or rather, the double sided approach of the Prasthanatraya texts. Accordingly, the texts employ two contradictory standpoints, two different epistemic grounds to conduct the inquiry into Brahman. First is Lokadrishti, Vyavaharika Drishti, or the empirical view. Second is Shastra Drishti, the Paramartha Drishti, the Vedantic view. Lokadrishti refers to the ordinary perception of oneself as an embodied being, equipped with a body mind complex, situated in a diverse universe, coexisting with other embodied beings. Shastra Drishti, on the other hand, is the contrasting perspective in which the ultimate reality is understood as the ground of all beings, the substratum of all phenomenal reality, the essential nature of the self. Swami writes, it will be clear that the teaching of Shrutis presupposes two different points of view in this procedure. One of these is the natural view, the empirical view which persuades a man to look upon himself as an ego endowed with mind and senses, stationed in a manifold universe along with other embodied beings like himself, knowing, acting, reaping, and experiencing the fruits of his actions, good or bad. This view, the Shruti calls the view of avidya, in contrast to the correct view, the view of vidya, from the standpoint of Atman as he is. The Upanishads, however, do make use of the empirical view to a very large extent in connection with their peculiar method, the adhyaropapavada, employed as a device to reveal the absolutely real. Accordingly, the texts employ deliberately a temporary attribution, that is adhyaropa, of a particular trait or feature from the empirical vantage point, from the lokadrishti, and subsequently retract or negate it from the shastric epistemological position, from the shastra drishti. This is not the same as the Vyavaharika Satta and Paramarthika Satta. This is a difference in two perspectives, two ways of looking at the same thing. One, you're looking from the view of the Loka Drishti, the Samanya Drishti, and the other is simply a change in perspective. You're looking at it from the Shastra Drishti. It is not two levels of reality. It is not Vyavaharika Satta and Paramarthika Satta. There is no two levels of reality being discussed here. Swami writes, the Upanishads take advantage of this tendency called avidya, ignorance, and taking an apparently real thing for the really real for the time being, discard some other thing, the obviously unreal, as unreal, and then reject the reality of the apparently real also by assuming something else to be really real. Thus, according to this method, the apparently real becomes a mean to determine the really real, while all the while the method keeps in mind that Brahman alone is the absolutely real entity. This is the technique of the method used by the Upanishads when they intend to take the inquirer from the known empirical world to the unknown Brahman. So both statements, the adhyaropa and apavada, contradicting yet complementing each other, form a singular cohesive pedagogical unit to communicate the truth. Such an approach is employed with the express purpose of excluding the possibility of reification, of concretization, of reduction of either statement, so that we don't hold on to any statement and spin theories out of them. This is the reason that this works. Now, Shastrakrita adhyaropa occurs on three distinct levels: words, sentences, and prakriyas. We'll consider each of them. First, consider the level of words. Most words themselves can be categorized as adhyaropas. Even a term as fundamental as Atman is itself an adhyaropa. In the Chandogya Upanishad Bhashya, there's a discussion. Nanvatmapti Atma Shabdena Abhidhiyate. Does not the word Atma denote the Atman? Na. Yato vacho nivartante, yatra nanya pashyati, ityadi shrutehe. No, as demonstrated by the Shruti Vakyas such as yato vacho nivartante and yatra nanya pashyati, etc. Katham tharhi आत्मैवाधस्तात् स आत्मेत्यादि शब्दा आत्मानं प्रत्याययन्ति. How then do texts such as आत्मैवाधस्तात् or sa atmeti, how do such texts, Shruti texts, how do they reveal the Atman then? Naisha doshaha dehavati pratyagatmani भेद विषये प्रयुज्यमानः शब्दो देहादीनाम् आत्मत्वे प्रत्याख्यायमाने यत् परिशिष्टं सदवाक्यमपि प्रत्याययति. The term Atman serves as a means of identifying it in contradistinction to the physical body that it inhabits, to convey that the referent which remains after the repudiation of the body and other non-self entity, what remains, that is what is intended. Swami writes, Atman is assumed to be an individual self in order to explode the delusion that the body, senses, mind, etc. may be the self. Thus, proceeding from the body, one rises to the consciousness of the true self by taking for granted that the inner and more subtle non-self is the actual self, rejecting the grosser non-self which was previously mistaken for the self. Ordinarily, man's idea is so vague and confounded that he takes any one of the psychological and psychic forces or organs as his own self for practical purposes. Thus, by means of the assumption of particular pseudo selves as the real self, certain other such selves may be relegated to the class of not selves, and the process might continue till at last one arrives at the genuine Atman, the one self in all beings. So the term Atman is itself an adhyaropa. The aim of invoking the term is not its designation per se, but rather to draw attention to its distinctiveness from the non-self entity. To say that what is not self, you use the word Atman. It to discriminate it from the not self reference. Similarly, the term Brahman is used to invalidate the potential limitations associated with the term Atman. When the connotations of the word Atman needs to be countered, the word Brahman is used. Most words, Jiva, Ishvara, Avidya, Maya, Bandha, Moksha, all are adhyaropas, the Shastrakrita adhyaropas. This is adhyaropa at the level of words. Now consider the level of sentences. In the Taittiriya Upanishad Bhashya, Shankaracharya illustrates how individual words in a sentence mutually control one another's meanings, exemplifying adhyaropa at the level of sentences. The sentence is Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahmeti. Each word of the sentence operates to correct or exclude the unwanted connotations of the other words of the sentence. Satyam means real or unchanging. Satyamiti yadrupena yannishchitam tadrupam navyabhicharate. Tat satyam. Yadrupena yannishchitam tadrupam vyabhicharat anrutam ityuchyate. अतः सत्यं ब्रह्मेति ब्रह्म विकारान् निवर्तयति. Very clearly, Shankaracharya writes, the word Satya is an adhyaropa that distinguishes Brahman from what changes. Satyam Brahmeti, Brahma Vikaran Nivartayati. Whatever changes is unreal. Whatever undergoes modification, Vikara, is Karya, effect. And Brahman is not an effect. It is not a Karya. So this word Satya removes the connotation or distinguishes Brahman for anything that changes. Ataha Satyam Brahmeti Brahma Vikaran Nivartayati. Next, now if Brahman is not a Vikara, if it is not Karya, then there is a doubt that occurs, is Brahman a Karana? If it is not Karya, it must be Karana. Ataha Karanatvam Praptam Brahmanaha. Karanasya cha Karakatvam Vastutvan Mridvat Achidrupata cha Prapta. If it is a Karana, then it must be Mridvat, like clay. Karanasya cha Karakatvam Vastutvat Mridvat Achidrupata cha Prapta. The Achidrupata Prapta. Now, there's a misconception that it is perhaps insentient, like clay. To counter this misconception, the word jnana is added after satyam. Ata idamuchyate jnanam brahmeti. Swami writes, it has been clarified by Bhashyakara that by applying the epithet satyam to Brahman, the Shruti wants to tell us that Brahman is no effect. Similarly, we have to understand that the expression jnanam brahma, Brahman is consciousness, aims at revealing that Brahman is unlike in nature to such things as a pot. For the Bhashya says, since it is declared that Brahman is the cause, it is liable to be taken as an efficient factor like any ordinary thing, an insentient thing like clay. Hence, to ward off this supposition, it is said Brahman is consciousness. Now, the moment you say jnana, it implies a jnatri, agent of knowing, because knowing cannot occur without a knower. This implies a limitation. To overcome this, to refute this misconception, the word ananta is added. Each term is an adhyaropa that intends to remove certain misconceptions. So words like satyam jnanam anantam, because they occur in mutual proximity, they control and are in turn controlled by one another, act to distinguish Brahman from the actual connotation of words like satyam jnanam anantam. This is adhyaropa at the level of sentences. The third is the level of prakriyas. But tomorrow's session is entirely dealing with the different prakriyas of adhyaropa pavada. So I'll deal with adhyaropa at the prakriya level in tomorrow's session. Today, I want to spend some time to understand the different methods of interpretation of the Vyakyanakaras. But before that, I'll read out a long excerpt from Swamiji. I have taken the English version because there was perhaps Sanskrit will not be not everybody can understand it entirely. So it's a long quotation. Let me just read it out. Although Brahman is devoid of all specific features, and although it is ever attained because of its all-pervading nature, and because of its being the very self of everyone, attainability is imputed to it in certain Shrutis. This is only to negate that it is attainable by some means other than knowledge. It also implies that Brahman should not be regarded as something to be reached after traveling towards it, as is the case with regard to Hiranyagarbha, whose attainability is taught in Shrutis. Sometimes no ability is attributed to Brahman by superimposition. And this superimposition is to reveal that ignorance is utterly destroyed by knowledge and that there remains nothing else to be known henceforth. And in certain cases, knowership is imposed to negate knowability. And by certain Shrutis, again, the nature of being a witness is imputed to Atman to deny even knowership to Atman. And by certain other texts, the very essential of Atman is pointed out, as in the text Neti Neti, in order to negate all specific attributes, including the nature of being a witness. Similarly, knowability by Vedantic text only is superimposed sometimes to teach that Atman is not knowable by perception and other empirical means. A certain ability by the mind is sometimes taught to indicate it is not known through sensual knowledge. And in other instances, it is taught that Brahman is beyond both the mind and speech in order to reveal that Atman is known exclusively through intuition, distinct from both mind and speech. The quotation continues. Nor is it a rule that each superimposition aims at removing only one particular thought construction. To illustrate by an example, superimposition of knowability of Atman not merely wards off the superimposition that some other thing deserves to be known, but also suggests that one becomes omniscient by the knowledge of Brahman, and that all his ignorance is removed once and for all. It is also implied that ignorance of Atman alone is responsible for the appearance of all duality, and that subsequent to the dawn of self knowledge, there would no longer continue the distinction of knower, means of knowledge, object of knowledge, and so on. We have here adduced only a few instances to indicate that some particular superimpositions are intended to negate some other particular thought constructs. The intelligent reader can now proceed for himself and infer the implied negations in similar cases. It should never be forgotten that whenever reality, free from all attributes, is presented as endowed with any particular attribute, it is only intended to negate some other property commonly imputed to it by the human mind. It never implies that the particular attribute employed for the purpose of teaching really characterizes reality as it is. For it will be seen that even this attribute is in its turn expressly negated elsewhere. This is adhyaropa according to Swamiji. I'll delve into this in great detail tomorrow. For now, I want to show how it differs from the Vyakyanakaras interpretation. Very often, because the Vyakyanakaras also use this phrase adhyaropa, it is not always clear how Swamiji's method stands different from them. So it might be useful to understand their standpoint, but only to understand Swamiji's standpoint better. Me. The Vyakyanakaras also hold that the Shruti cannot communicate the nature of Brahman. So they say that because it cannot communicate Brahman directly, it adopts a more indirect approach to indicate its nature. Consider Vachaspati Mishra's statement. He is commenting here on Shankaracharya's Vakya, Nahi Shastram Idantaya Vishay Bhutam Brahma Pratipipadayishate. On this Vakya, this is his bhashya on this particular Vakya of Shankaracharya. Vachaspati Mishra writes, Sarvameva hi Vakyam Nedantaya Vastubhutam Bodhayitum Arhati. Every sentence cannot indicate the difference between any two things very precisely. For instance, nahi ikshu kshira gudadinam madhura rasa bhedaha shakya akyatum. Nobody can point out the exact difference in sweetness between sugarcane, honey, and jaggery. All the three are sweet, but there's a difference in their sweetness. And no words can communicate exactly how different each sweetness is from the other. This difference is verbally inexpressible. Tena प्रमाणांतर सिद्धे लौकिके वार्थे यदा गतिरीदृशा शब्दस्य तदा कैव कथा प्रत्यगात्मन्यलौकिके. If this is the case, when objective things are concerned, when worldly things are concerned, we are not able to express correctly what it is, then how much more difficult it is to find the words which can indicate the transmundane Brahman or Atman? Not possible. But विप्रकर्षेण तु कथंचित् प्रतिपादनम इहापि समानम. This is where the difference lies. Viprakarshena tu kathanchit, still somehow in an approximate manner, in an indirect manner, somehow kathanchit, there can be predication even here, ihapi sambhavati. This is a fundamental point of divergence between Swami's interpretation and that of the Vyakyanakaras. In contrast to Swami's view, the Vyakyanakaras argue that the Shruti cannot communicate the nature of Brahman directly, but it can do so indirectly in an approximate manner. They believe that the Shruti employs a more circuitous route, an indirect route to indicate Brahman. And one of the methods to indicate Brahman is adhyaropa. So for the Vyakyanakaras, while the method of adhyaropa is employed by the Shruti, it is not understood in the same way that Swamiji understands it. For Swamiji, the adhyaropa is a method that removes ignorance about Brahman. For the Vyakyanakaras, this method is used to indicate Brahman indirectly. Further, it is not the only method used to indicate Brahman indirectly. They maintain that there are other means through which the nature of Brahman can be indicated by the Shruti. In fact, the assertion is that Brahmajnana is accomplished by a combination of several approaches, not a single one, and it is only for the sake of convenience that we try to distinguish between them. In Shruti and in the actual teaching process, they are all employed together and they presuppose each other. Let us first look at understand the method of adhyaropa as understood by the Vyakyanakaras works. Consider the Gita Vakya, where the phrase adhyaropa is directly employed by the Bhashya, in the Bhashya. Sarvatah panipatam tat sarvatokshishiro mukham sarvatah shrutimaloke sarvamavritya tishtati. Here the adhyaropa of Jnanendriya and Karmendriya on Brahman is a purely pedagogic device for indicating the existence of Brahman. In reality, all such attributions are false. According to the Vyakyanakaras, this attribution is grounded in the notion that the physical faculties of all beings perform their functions due to the presence of Brahman. So these bodily traits are utilized as a means to recognize the existence of Brahman. Brahman is indicated as the Atman through its nature as the Chaitanya that drives the movement of the body, the sense organs, the mind. So this shloka is an indicator through which Brahman is pointed out. The Chaitanya that illumines the body, illumines the sense organs, illumines the mind is Brahman. It is not the body mind itself, but the Chaitanya that illumines it is Brahman. So Brahman is pointed out, indicated the way Arundhati Nakshatra is pointed out. However, the attributions are untrue or upacharamatra. The purpose of using such language is to point towards the existence of Brahman, not to be taken literally. When these aspects of Brahman are fully grasped by the student, then all the attributions, the upadhis, are negated. Having accomplished their purpose, the definitions are withdrawn in the very next shloka, Sarvendriya Gunabhasam sarvendriya vivarjitam asaktam sarvabhrichaiva nirgunam guna bhoktrika. This type of paradoxical statements, stating something first, immediately stating the or immediately negating it in the next. The verbal juxtaposition of such contradictory natures, one immediately followed by the other, this comprises the method of adhyaropa and apavada. It is one way by which the finite limitations of language can, to some extent, be overcome to indicate Brahman. The Shruti abounds in with such examples of this kind of verbal juxtaposition. You have in the Isha, anejadekam manaso javeyo, nainad devan apnuvan purvamarashat, तद्धावतो तद्धावतो ज्ञानत्येति तिष्ठत्. I forget the exact mantra, but the contradiction, the fact that it is far, it is near, faster than mind, free from motion, tadejate tannejate taddure tadvantike tadantarasya sarvasya tadu sarvasyasya bahyatah, faster than the mind, free from, but it is also free from motion. It is near, it is far, it is inside, it is outside, it is moving, it is unmoving. Usual polarities of language that exclude each other are inadequate by themselves, and the limitations are overcome by the juxtapositions. The nature of Brahma is revealed somehow through this odd and logically inappropriate language. An adhyaropa, false attribution, is first made of Brahman, then an apavada or negation of this is made. So this is adhyaropa and apavada according to the Vyakyanakaras. It is one method that indicates Brahman to us indirectly, kathanchit. Another method is the Netivada. I will point out the difference with Swamiji's method, because for Swamiji, everything is Adhyaropa Pavada. All of these different methods that the Vyakyanakaras point to are all fit under the umbrella term of Adhyaropa Pavada. We'll come to that. So another method of showing Brahman indirectly is the Netivada, the method of pure negation, another means by which the words are detached from their primary limited denotations. Purely negative definitions of Brahman are intended to distinguish it from the known and limited referents of all words. And these and negative descriptions are exceedingly common. तद अद्रेश्यम अग्राह्यम अगोत्रम अवर्णम अचक्षुश्रोत्रम तदपाणिपादम नित्यम विभुम सर्वगतम सुसूक्ष्मम तदव्ययम यद्भूतयोनिम परिपश्यन्ति धीराः. Then you have अशब्दम स्पर्शम अरूपम अव्ययम तथा रसम नित्यम गंधवच्च यत् अनाद्यनंतम महतः परम ध्रुवम. You have many definitions which completely are negative in essence. So these negations employed by Shruti is twofold. The contrary attributes are side by side denied in order so that the negation of one attribute does not lead to the supposition that Brahman is characterized by its opposite. So the essential aim of the negative method is to deny all specifications which are the result of superimposition. The method of negation, according to the Vyakyanakaras, is a unique way of defining Brahman rather than simply suggesting an inability to formulate a concept of Brahman. Very quickly, the third method is lakshana. The two methods of teaching about Brahman which we have thus far considered are essentially negative in character. They highlight the problems of language in relation to Brahman and point to the fact that Brahman is beyond ordinary signification of any words. According to the Vyakyanakaras, these methods prepare us for and are made complete by the positive method of definition through lakshana. Now, We know that every shabda, every word has two functions or two powers, abhidha and lakshana. Abhidha is the denotative function by which the word communicates its direct meaning. If I say it is a tree, it is a tree. There is no more or no more, no less. It communicates its direct meaning is abhidha. Lakshana is the secondary meaning of the word. When the primary meaning of the sentence or the word is not intelligible according to our usual understanding, in order to make sense of the meaning of the speaker's utterance, we have no alternative but to give up the literal meaning, give up the primary meaning of the words, and find the meaning that is implied through the literal meaning. Mukhyartha badhayam lakshanayaha prakluptihi. Lakshana arises if the primary meaning is obstructed. So, according to the later Advaitins, the Upanishadic words indicate Brahman through their implied meaning or secondary meaning. Lakshana. They quote Shankaracharya also. Shankaracharya says in uses the word lakshana in many places. Lakshana cha yatha sambhavam sannikrishtena viprakristena va swartha sambandhena pravartate. Accordingly, there are three types of lakshana: jahal lakshana, ajahal lakshana, jahad ajahal lakshana. Please forgive me for engaging in a very long discourse about the Purva Paksha also, but I feel like it is important to understand the position in order to understand our position better. This is the only reason. We'll, I will be very quickly, I will go through these slides. Lakshana Trividha, Jahal Lakshana, Ajahal Lakshana, Jahad Ajahal Lakshana Cheti. Tatra Shakyam Anantarabhavyam Yatra Arthantara Pratitihi Tatra Jahal Lakshana. In a sentence like Gangayam Ghoshaha, it's the standard example. I don't want to dwell too much on it. Very briefly, in a sentence like Gangayam Ghoshaha, the village is on the Ganga. The village cannot literally be on the Ganga. So the primary sense of the term Ganga is abandoned, and secondary meaning, which is bank of Ganga. So the village is on the bank of Ganga, not literally on Ganga. So the bank of Ganga is taken. This is Jahal Lakshana. Jahat Swartha. The Swartha, the primary meaning is given up. Swartham Jahati. So Jahal Lakshana. Yet the next is Ajahal Lakshana. Yatra Shakyartham Antarbhavyaiva Arthantara Pratitihi. In this context, it is not necessary that the primary meaning should be completely abandoned. Secondary meaning includes the primary meaning also. The Shakyartham is Antarbhavyaiva Arthantaram. So the secondary meaning includes the primary meaning also. The very standard example is Kuntaha Pravishanti. Kuntaha are lances, like swords, lances. So if you say lances or swords enter, the word Kuntaha here indicates through Lakshana that they are being carried by men. So men carrying the lances, swords is implied here. So the primary meaning is not entirely abandoned. The secondary meaning includes the primary meaning also. This is Ajahal Lakshana. यत्र हि विशिष्टवाचकः शब्दः एकदेशं विहाय एकदेशे वर्तते तत्र जहत् अजहल लक्षणा. This is a case where only a part or an aspect of the primary meaning is preserved, rest is rejected. So when you say soyam devadattaha, this is that devadatta. The term that devadatta, the term that is determined in a certain past. This devadatta is that devadatta. When you say it like that, when you're this that devadatta is determined in a certain past, a different time and space. And the term this refers to the same devadatta as determined by the present time and space. Maybe Devadatta has grown old. Maybe he doesn't even look the same. Maybe he is much taller than he was earlier, or fatter or thinner. It is not the same Devadatta. So when it is said this is that Devadatta, no identity is posited between the physical attributes of Devadatta. Omitting these accidental qualities like leanness or stoutness, what is qualified by them is asserted to be the same. It only means the identity of the substantive Devadatta. So you reject the incompatible elements, take what is left. So of the three types of lakshana, Advaitins use the third type, this Jahad Ajahal Lakshana, in their hermeneutics of the Upanishads. Take the sentence Tattvamasi. In the sentence Tattvamasi, Tvam in the context refers to Shvetaketu as son of Uddalaka. Or less than, if you don't want to take that, it still refers to the individual with the body, embodied individual. Here, this is not the intended meaning. So, Tvam is stripped of all the individual attributes, now refers to Jivatma. So, only when it is stripped of all the individual attributes does it refer to Jivatma. Otherwise, it refers to Shvetaketu, or it refers to the physical body, etc. Similarly, when you say Tat, Tat means Paramatman, stripped of all the qualifications such as omniscience, etc. So the usual well-known meaning of Tat is omniscient, omnipotent Brahman, cause of the world, while the usual well-known meaning of Tvam is the body, etc. So in interpreting Tattvamasi, Tat and Tvam cannot be taken in their well-known Mukhyartha, but only in the Lakshyartha. So when the Jivatma is asserted to be identical with Paramatma, it is not the individual self as characterized by agency, suffering, ignorance that is asserted to be identical with Brahman. In the individual self, the ego to which the agency enjoyment belongs is distinguished from the pure being, and the latter alone is asserted to be identical with Brahman. So a part of the usual meaning of that Tvam Padartha is abandoned, part of it is retained. For Tat also, by Tat, it is not meant as usual the pure consciousness which is remote, paroksha. That is removed. So by Tat, only pure conscious alone is meant, and Tvam, the pure self, free from agency, etc., is meant. And by employing this Jahad Ajahal Lakshana, the identity of Jiva and Brahma is asserted. Now, this does not end here. What we saw is that Shruti employs different techniques to convey Brahman, adhyaropa, netivada, jahad ajahal lakshana, etc. But this brings us back to the very important question: how is ignorance removed according to the Vyakyanakaras? We have earlier discussed that the primary function of Shruti is negative. It functions to remove ignorance, not to communicate Brahman. So far, we saw how Brahman is indicated through a variety of techniques, but the question remains: how is ignorance removed through all this? The answer of the Vyakyanakaras is through Akhandakara Vritti. Now, please bear in mind that there are differences between the expositions of each of the Vyakyanakaras. I cannot give a comprehensive account of this position. I'm only trying to give a general idea only. So, accordingly, Akhandakara Vritti is a very special cognitive mode that presents an integral, impartite, undifferentiated, non-conceptual content in which Jiva Brahmaikya stands revealed. Accordingly, the Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana aid this process. By Shravana, the meanings of the words of the Vedic statements are grasped, are determined. By Manana, the subject matter is affirmed. Through this, any doubts entertained by the mind about the distinctive misgivings about this identity is removed. And this is very important because as long as doubts persist, mind cannot concentrate. So this is very important for concentration of the mind. Then Nididhyasana is deep contemplation, an intense mental effort, prayatna, regarding the identity between Jiva and Brahman. Such contemplation brings about, in due course, a preparedness of the mind. It prepares the mind for the akhandakara chittavritti. So Shravana establishes the premise. Manana reaffirms the same truth by disabusing the mind of all misgivings and doubts that might arise from the logical plane of mind regarding the stated truth. Nididhyasana ingrains the same truth so deeply in the mind that the false identification of jiva with the physical body, which has pursued the person from time immemorial, becomes shaken. In this way, when the mind becomes free from all misconceptions regarding the identity between Jiva and Brahman, in other words, when the mind becomes adequately receptive, then the great Vedantic statements, the mahavakyas, present to the mind the akhandakara chittavritti, which brings avidya to its end. Each word of the Mahavakya produces Nirvikalpa Pratyaksha, presents an Akhandartha, while the whole sentence also generates Nirvikalpa Pratyaksha, knowledge of pure Brahman without any reference to the Padapadartha or any reference to time or space of their existence. Chitsukha says, Aparyaya Shabdanam Samsargagochara Pramiti Janakatvam Akhandarthata. Madhusudana is very closely follows Chitsukacharya. पर्याय शब्दानां पदवृत्ति स्मरितातिरिक्त अगोचर प्रमादनकत्वम्. If you argue that this is a mental mode, it is a vritti, how is it capable of destroying ignorance? The reply is that the Akhandakara vritti is not an ordinary mental mode. It is a very special type of vritti that destroys every other vritti, gives rise to the direct perception of Brahman, then perishes itself as well, leaving only the ever-existing reality. Like water droplets poured on red hot piece of metal destroys the heat, destroys itself. It is like using a thorn for removing another thorn and discarding both thorns. We will briefly discuss how Swami interprets the Mahavakyas and conclude today's session. This occurs in the Naishkarmya Siddhi commentary, the Klesha Apaharini. Very beautifully, very perfectly, very clearly, Sureshwaracharya compares the Mahavakya Aham Brahmasmi to the sentence Yoyam Sthanuhu Pumanesha. It is so simple, so elegant, so beautiful, so perfect. No unnecessary complicated theories of Jahada Jahal Lakshana, Akhandakara Vritti. Very simply, this sentence Aham Brahmasmi is like the sentence Soyam Sthanuhu Pumanesha Pundhiya Sthanudhiriva Brahmasmi iti dhiya Ashesha hi Aham Buddhir Nivartyate. Consider the standard rope snake analogy. I'm sorry to use the same analogy, but it's just the easiest example, easiest analogy. So let's just go with it. Say you see a rope, you confuse it for a snake. You are scared. You jump out of your skin. And I come along and I tell you, the snake that you see is a rope. Observe this sentence. I'm telling you that the snake that you see is a rope. The first half of this sentence is the snake that you see. This is adhyaropa. In reality, there is no snake. The snake does not exist there. What you think you see is false. And I know that it is false. You don't know that it is false, but I do. I know that it's false. Yet, because you think that you see a snake, I use your wrong understanding to tell you that there is no snake. This is adhyaropa. This is Shastra Kata adhyaropa. Shastra knows, Shruti knows, but despite knowing the reality, it uses the false notion that we entertain to remove that very false notion. The sentence Aham Brahmasmi is just like that. It is like saying, this snake that you see is a rope. The first half of the sentence is Aham. Equate that with this snake you see. The second half of the sentence is a rope. Equate that with Brahmasmi. Yoyam sthanuhu pumanesha pundhiya sthanudhiriva brahmasmeti dhiya asheshahi aham buddhir nivartyate. Sureshwaracharya has written in such clear terms, yet this whole lakshana vritti is credited to Sureshwaracharya. The Vyakyanakaras claim that Sureshwaracharya used the method of lakshana to explain the Mahavakya Tattvamasi. It is unforgivable. Swami writes in his Kleshapaharini, Yatha kaschit मंदांधकारे अतिदूरदेशे वा तिष्ठन्तं निश्चलं पुरुषं स्थाणुत्वेन गृहीत्वा. In slight darkness or from a very far distance, you see a very still person. A man is standing very still, and you think that he is a still object, an object like a post, a sthanu. यथा कश्चित् मंदांधकारे अतिदूरदेशे वा तिष्ठन्तं निश्चलं पुरुषं स्थाणुत्वेन गृहीत्वा तदनु. After that, प्रकाशतः यः सन् समीपं गत्वा वा, when there is some light or you go closer to him, निपुणतरम् अवेक्ष्य प्रत्येति व्यपदिशति च योऽयं स्थाणुः पुमानेशः इति. तत्र पुन्धिया उत्तरभाविन्या प्राक्तनी स्थाणुधीर निवर्त्यते. The later cognition that this is a man removes the earlier cognition that this is a post. पुन्धिया उत्तरभाविन्या प्राक्तनी स्थाणुधीर निवर्त्यते. एवं अहम ब्रह्मास्मीति श्रुतिवाक्योत्थदिया पूर्वं लब्ध प्रसरा अहम मनुष्यः चक्षुष्मान् बुद्धिमान् इत्यादि रूपा अशेषा अहम बुद्धिरपि निवर्त्यते इति न चित्रम्. तस्मात् अहम ब्रह्मास्मीति श्रुतिव्यपदेशो नाहम् आत्मधर्मत्वम् आधातुम् अलम् इत्यभिप्रायः. So according to Swamiji, the only method of the Shruti is the method of adhyaropa. It is used as a negative dialectic to remove ignorance. It makes use of the false misconceptions that we already entertain, uses those very same false misconceptions to remove the false misconception. The approach resolves all the contradictions that is claimed exists in the Shruti and the Shankara Bhashya. But unfortunately, it has not been recognized as the only method of Shruti. Shankara Swamiji's approach presents a paradigm shift in understanding the nature of Brahman, the methods used to attain the knowledge of it. A paradigm shift that corrects the existing tradition, reinstates the true Shankaracharya tradition. So we'll look into the details of this tomorrow. We will study it in detail tomorrow. For now, thank you very much for staying with me today.